As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
Just before leaving town for Christmas break, the U.S. House gave Americans a last-minute holiday gift, a nearly $1 trillion military spending bill filled with lots of goodies for the special interests and the military-industrial complex. Unfortunately, the rest of America got nothing but coal in its stockings. With constitutionalists like Representative Thomas Massie on the House Rules Committee, Speaker Johnson made the unusual move to bringing the National Defense Authorization Act under suspension of the rules, which bypasses the Rules Committee but requires 2/3 of the House to pass the bill. Considering that Speaker Johnson tossed into the must-pass bill yet another extension of Section 702 of the FISA Act, it's unsurprising that he wanted to rush the bill through without the possibility of amendment. Section 702 allows the government to intercept and retain without a warrant the communications of any American who is in contact with a non-U.S. citizen. It is clearly a violation of the Fourth Amendment, which is supposed to protect Americans against unreasonable searches and seizures. Section 702 was legalized under President George W. Bush during the War on Terror after it was revealed that Bush was using the National Security Agency to illegally spy on Americans. We were told at the time that government must be granted these authorities because we were under threat from terrorists. It would just be a temporary measure, we were promised, and then the authority would expire. That was 15 years ago, and here we are, reauthorizing the government to continue to violate our liberties. As with the rest of the violations of our civil liberties after 9/11, like the Patriot Act and the creation of the Department of Homeland Security and the TSA, the federal government soon turned its terrorism-fighting tools inward, targeting Americans rather than foreigners who we were told wanted to harm Americans. That's why the FBI's so-called domestic terrorism watch list continues to expand to include Christians and those skeptical of big government. So rather than debating whether we want a government more like East Germany than the one our founders imagined, Section 702 was tossed into the military spending bill. The NDAA also contained a $600 million gift to the corrupt government of Ukraine. As opposition to further spending on Ukraine's failed war with Russia's increases in the House, Republican leadership decided to add what may be the last parting gift to the military-industrial complex. As with most foreign assistance, however, Ukraine will likely see very little of this money. Most of it will be laundered through the military contractors and lobbyists who line every corner of the Beltway. The NDAA also pushes us further toward confrontation with China, authorizing more than $100 million to train Taiwan's military and a further $9 billion to continue sending U.S. military ships to harass China in its backyard. I believe Speaker Johnson is intelligent with a bright future in House leadership. He has inherited a broken system and a legislative body that operates without any guiding principle. I sincerely hope he will begin to listen to the increasing voices in the House who are questioning the warfare-welfare state. We are more than $33 trillion in debt, with interest payments on that debt dwarfing all other government spending. A crash is coming. There is no time for more business as usual. Thanks for listening.
So Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin met with Israeli officials in Tel Aviv on Monday and vowed continued U.S. military support for the Israeli onslaught on Gaza, despite the massive civilian casualty rate. So in a meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Austin said that the U.S. commitment to Israel is unshakable. He said, quote, "America's commitment to Israel is unwavering, and no individual group or state should test our resolve," end quote. Austin vowed that the U.S. would continue to provide Israel with the equipment that it needs, referring to the bombs that the U.S. has been shipping there and other military equipment. And the Pentagon has said that these arms shipments have continued on a near daily basis since October 7th. U.S. officials have said that they want Israel to wrap up the current phase of the war, which involves the constant airstrikes and the ground campaign. They want them to finish that in the next few weeks and then take a more targeted approach against Hamas, a more limited attack. Austin said that the U.S. had thoughts about more surgical operations, but he made clear the timeline of the onslaught, the timeline of the operations is up to Israel. Austin said, quote, regarding the timeline, this is Israel's operation, and I'm not here to dictate timeline or terms. Our support to Israel's right to defend itself is ironclad, as you've heard me say a number of times, and that's not going to change, end quote. So at a press conference with Austin, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said that the Israeli military would continue to operate in different levels of intensity, which is how he put it. And they'll do that as they see fit and will eventually transition gradually into the next phase of the war. So when discussing civilian casualties, Austin said, quote, protecting Palestinian civilians in Gaza is both a moral duty and a strategic imperative, end quote. But he also gave cover for Israeli slaughter of civilians, saying that the population density in Gaza makes it very, very difficult for the Israeli operations. So if he's saying it's a moral duty to protect Palestinian civilians, that means that the U.S. should not be supporting what Israel's doing in Gaza. So, they say one thing on one hand about civilian casualties, but the truth is they don't really care because they're still providing all this support that Israel relies on. And so the U.S. has formally announced the launch of a new military operation in the Red Sea aimed at responding to attacks on commercial shipping by Yemen's Houthis that started in response to the brutal Israeli assault on Gaza. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin announced the initiative dubbed Operation Prosperity Guardian while on a trip to the region and said that the other countries taking part include the UK, Bahrain, Canada, France, Italy, Netherlands, Norway, the Seychelles, and Spain. So Bahrain, the only Arab country in there that is joining in so far. The Houthi attacks have forced some of the world's largest shipping lines to suspend Red Sea transits, which is going to have a big impact on the global economy. The British energy giant BP announced on Monday that it was stopping all shipments of oil and gas through the water. So that's another huge company saying that they're not going to sail through there anymore. So the Houthis, known as Ansar Allah, have vowed to target all ships heading to and from Israel and said the only way to restore calm to the region is through a lasting ceasefire in Gaza. The Houthis have shown no sign of backing down, and they announced on Monday that they launched 2 drone attacks on commercial vessels. So the attacks continue, and the U.S. is considering taking military action. It's not clear exactly what this big naval task force is going to do. I guess they're going to be there to try to intercept missiles and drones, as U.S. warships have already been doing that. But now they've formally announced this new military operation. So there's an interesting report in Bloomberg that said that Saudi Arabia and the UAE are split on how the U.S. should respond. So the U.S. has backed the Saudi-UAE coalition against the Houthis since 2015. The Saudis and the UAE kind of back different players in this war. The Saudis back the so-called internationally recognized government that's been exiled from Yemen. I mean, they have some control, some territory on the ground, but not much. And then you have the UAE, who backs the Southern Transition Council, which wants to separate what used to be South Yemen from what used to be North Yemen. So anyway, apparently the UAE wants the U.S. to take direct military action against the Houthis and redesignate them as a foreign terrorist organization, which would make the peace deal between the Saudis and the Houthis, it would be impossible to implement. And then the Saudis fear that military action against the Houthis could provoke more attacks, and they're worried that their oil facilities would start coming under attack again. That was a big reason why the Saudis decided to make peace with the Houthis, was they got really good at hitting their oil facilities, and they don't want that to happen again. So it's just interesting to see the divide here. And I mean, who knows? This just doesn't seem like it's going in a good direction. Things are going to escalate in some way. I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow the U.S. bombed Yemen, or we wake up and that's the news. I feel like it might only be a matter of time before the U.S. does that, and then who knows what could happen. White House said on Monday that a weapons package will be provided to Ukraine later this month, and after that, the U.S. will be out of funds to arm Ukraine until Congress authorizes more spending on the proxy war. So the Pentagon still has $4.4 billion in presidential drawdown authority, which allows the U.S. to send weapons to Ukraine straight from military stockpiles. So they have $4.4 billion left in that. But the issue is, according to the White House, that they're going to run out of funding needed to replenish the arms being sent. So they can't replace the stuff that they're sending over there, and they've sent so much to Ukraine that they can't spare much more. So Mike McCord, who's the Pentagon's comptroller, he made Congress aware of the situation in a letter that he sent on Sunday. So John Kirby, the National Security Council spokesman, said, quote, "We are still planning one more aid package to Ukraine later this month. However, when that one's done, as the comptroller, Mr. McCord, made clear in his note to Congress today, we will have no more replenishment authority available to us, and we're going to need Congress to act without a delay, as we have been saying," end quote. So the Biden administration wants over $60 billion for Ukraine and has been pleading with Congress to approve this big $111 billion military aid package that it's requested. The Republicans are still holding out for a border deal, but they just continue to make these pleas to Congress really sound like they're begging. So it's not clear when this Ukraine aid will be approved. I think, unfortunately, that it probably will be eventually, because the Republicans are not saying, I mean, some Republicans that are against funding the war in Ukraine, but Republican leadership, and it seems like for the most part, Republicans are saying, give us this border deal, then we'll give you whatever you want in Ukraine.
Life insurance actuaries are finding that more people are continuing to die at alarming rates, even more than before the pandemic, that cannot be accounted for by COVID. Of course, there's an attempt to suggest that this is because of COVID, but plainly, and that was even evident in that legacy media reporting, it isn't COVID, but it's contemporaneous with COVID. So can you remember anything else happening? Just let's work on this as a planet together. At the time of COVID, did anything else happen that could have a massive deleterious impact on human health? I don't know, we just have to look at clues. Did any major organisations, for example, demand indemnity from legal prosecution? That would be a clue, because that would point, I think, if anyone said you can't publish any information for 75 years, these kind of things would all be clues. So let's all just together, like Scooby-Doo and the gang, have a look and see if there's any information. For instance, the Society of Actuaries Research Institute found that there was a 34% increase in deaths among working-age people 35 to 44 in the last quarter of 2022. Because they're not an at-risk group from COVID, are they? That's not comorbidities, that's not elderly, that's not respiratory conditions, that's working-aged people. 34% is sort of unthinkable. If that happened and there wasn't something being concealed, this would be headline news. If this was a story that could be used to say, and therefore everyone better start carrying an ID card, or therefore everyone better remain in their homes, it's because of climate change. We found that because of fossil fuel fumes in the air, 34% of people are dying. Get in your house, give us your car, you will own nothing and be happy. They would be on it. So it's something that's not being investigated. Isn't this extraordinary? Another clue would be, I suppose, if there was a particular industry that paid a lot of money to news media and their advertising, that would be good. Someone should look into that as well. Also, were there any subjects that were heavily censored, where true information was censored? These are all breadcrumbs out of this forest of death and lies. Many of them are working age people who are in the prime of their life, not anymore, who are suffering deaths from cardiac and neurological disorders. However, the CDC and public health agencies are at a loss to explain these statistics, nor is there any apparent urgency on their part to get to the bottom of the crisis. Well, we'd have to look to see if the CDC has any financial relationships with any other industries. Just keep putting all these clues together. Hopefully the COVID inquiry in the UK will get to the bottom of this, or when Anthony Fauci is, for example, being interviewed by the legacy media, he'll help us because, after all, he is science. The phenomenon is not confined to the US. In the UK, deaths among 20 to 44-year-olds in the first quarter of 2023 were similar to the same time frame in 2021 at the peak of the COVID deaths and above baselines for the years before the pandemic. That's interesting, isn't it? Because 2023, there is no pandemic. 2021, the height of the pandemic. So at the height of the pandemic, the same number of people died now after the pandemic, and yet the pandemic's not there anymore. So something's causing at least that many deaths, even though the pandemic is over. What could it be? In Australia, excess deaths in 2022 were 12% higher than previous years, with 1/3 of those deaths considered non-COVID related. Number of excess deaths in the last 12 months. As of May 21, 2023, the US had over 103,000, Germany had 83,000, France had 17,600, UK had 55,000, Brazil 60,000, Russia 72,000, and Italy 25,650. We did an interview recently with Steve Kirsch exclusively over on Rumble because we were cautious about putting it anywhere else because it pertained to the data breach in New Zealand with the data that was specifically stolen by Barry Young, who some are calling the Edward Snowden of the pandemic. I urge you to have a look at that data that pertained, of course, to certain medical measures that took place during that period, because when you see numbers of this size, the information that even I was somewhat incredulous and certainly skeptical about starts to make sense. I urge you to have a look at that video on our channel. It's worth recalling the comments from January 2022 by Scott Davison, CEO at one of Indiana's life insurance companies. We are seeing right now the highest death rates we've seen in the history of this business, not just at One America. The data is consistent across every player in the business. So this is data that's not actually even coming from medical analysis, but from insurance companies. So it's only when it started becoming financially relevant. Wait a minute, we can't keep insuring everyone. Everyone's dying. Well, put up the premiums, the idiots. They're also poor because the economy collapsed around the same time, almost as if something happened that was beneficial to rich people, reduced the population, limited the ability of ordinary people to communicate. This is just so baffling. Just raise the premiums and let this thing sort itself out. If people were just all of a sudden dying because of some novel new agent, there would be footage from across the world of people passing out, collapsing, dying, banging their head that we would all be able to put together and look at as kind of evidence that something unprecedented and historic had taken place. Here it is.
Comedian Heather McDonald collapsed over the weekend during a show.
Management saying she suffered a skull fracture in the fall.
The CDC has confirmed
higher than normal cases
of heart inflammation in 16 to 24-year-olds.
Service members later developed myocarditis.
You take all of the vaccines since 2010 and you compare 2021, this thing blows through the roof.
Experts say more and more younger women are suffering from stroke.
Sorry, Aaron, I'm not feeling very well right now.
80% of the cases have been in young boys.
I am in the hospital with heart complications from the COVID-19 vaccine.
The 14-year-old's heart stopped.
A 15-year-old boy died
after receiving his first dose.
16-year-old was rushed to the hospital. Loved ones say the 17-year-old's heart stopped.
The elite runner was rushed to the hospital after suffering a heart attack.
A football player has died
just hours after getting his second
dose of COVID vaccine.
After collapsing on the football field.
After collapsing in the middle of the game.
Collapsing during the game.
Collapsing on the tennis court.
Suddenly collapsing.
The player
collapsed and died.
After collapsing.
He collapsed.
It seems that there's a second player who's collapsed.
This is unusual.
Never seen anything like this. Yeah, what's going on?
Yeah, what's happening?
It is now well established that the mRNA vaccines cause heart inflammation.
That's very disturbing to watch. So we have to ensure that we stay away from crackpots and conspiracy theorists. And I think we'll be relatively safe in the hands as we continue to investigate of Dr. Pierre Corey, MD, President and Chief Medical Officer at the Frontline COVID-19 Critical Care Alliance. This is what he wrote. Food and Drug Administration Commissioner Robert Califf recently took to X to mourn the catastrophic decline in US life expectancy. But his post, which on smoking, diet, chronic illness and healthcare, ignored the obvious. People are dying in abnormally high numbers even now and long since COVID-19 waned. Yet public health agencies and medical societies are silent. That's what's peculiar about this, isn't it? Remember earlier, 34% increase in the age range of 35 to 44-year-old working people. That's astonishing, and you can bet that if it was something that could be used to legitimize further regulation or control of a population, or to levy some tax, or to legitimize some new measure, or allow censorship or surveillance on new ID cards, it will be examined. Why are they not looking at this? These are just normal statistics. We're not making this stuff up. So what's happening? What's being concealed? What's not being reported? Is it possible that the government, the legacy media and Big Pharma are working together so extensively that they can essentially manage reality? The shared public reality only includes data that is permissible. And when people try to intervene and give you alternative narratives, those people are removed one way or another. Life insurers have been consistently sounding the alarm over these unexpected or excess deaths, which claimed 158,000 more Americans in the first 9 months of 2023 than in the same period in 2019. That exceeds America's combined losses from every war since Vietnam. Congress should urgently work with insurance experts to investigate this troubling trend. So in the first 9 months of 2023, America's excess deaths accumulate to more than all of the deaths of American soldiers and military personnel in every single war since Vietnam. Think of all the parades and reporting and consternation and doubt as a result of the Afghanistan war, the Korea war, the Iraq wars, the current conflicts around the world. Doesn't that suggest that there should be some sort of inquiry, investigation, parade, special day, few minutes silence, accountability? What's going on?
You run your mouth and I run my business, brother. You tell everybody I'm busted. You talk so much you got me disgusted. But you run your mouth and I run my business, brother.
All right. Let's take a look at some more topics for today. Let's start with let's go with the latest in Ukraine. We're recapping all the news from last week, so we're going to go quick here. We don't pontificate like they do on the Part of the Problem podcast, 15, 20-minute segments. We're quick here. You get 2 minutes of information. It's a broad stroke, and you're left more confused. That's the way we handle things over here for all these new Twitter commentators. EU membership talks with Ukraine, a direct pivot from the current strategy of paying to get their soldiers killed. All right, yeah, okay, fine. These are my own notes. I didn't have to read that out loud. That shouldn't even be there. Dude, I don't quite understand what's going on in the Ukraines. It seems like they would like to try and negotiate this thing down, and so everyone's looking for maximum leverage. And so while we're not sending additional funds over there, we're trying to weasel out of getting additional funds. Now they're going back to NATO conversations or EU membership conversations, which I guess is to, poke back at Putin, who is going, nope, I won this thing, so I'm going to exert my maximum leverage over here. I'm enjoying that Putin's going like full force with I will not leave this until Ukraine is denazified, because there's no way that we can allow him to make an official statement of I have denazified what the Americans and the Europeans were supporting. But who knows? Maybe Zelensky's got to turn over all the Nazis that he's been working with, and then they can finally call it a war. What are your guys' predictions at this point? Do we think we're coming to the end? Do you think it's as it's an election season, we can't continue to send money over there? We have to finally realize and accept our losses, and realizing that, there's no way to convince the American people that Putin's going to go and take all of Europe, and there aren't too many more Ukrainians that we can even get killed? Or do you think we're in this in the end, and 20 years from now, there's still just going to be a little bit of a fight going on the Ukraine border? You guys are in the chat. You can tell me what you think. Next is we've got the impeachment inquiry is ramping up. You had Biden. He didn't show up. I find the whole thing has been boring to me. It's like, yeah, just give me the firm evidence already about how, China's been bribing the Biden family and how Joe Biden has been directly involved. And, it's taken a long time of teasing that they were going to go after these people, that they were going to actually start impeachment proceedings, which would give them better access to all of the presidential financials. And then they'd finally be able to bust the guy for what they say has already been blatant financial crimes. You got to quit teasing the story. I need some closure here. I can't keep constantly living my life in this soap opera that seasons are going to come to a conclusion that they never do. I think that was a Tim Dillon thing about that. We all see this, like there's going to be conclusions, and then there just aren't they never actually come to a conclusion. Pre-election, the interest rate is going down. You guys loading up on bonds before we move away from this 5.5% interest rate? Do you think that inflation was over? Do you think that the government can start pumping monies back into these things? Sending the stocks back to the moon, sending the Bitcoins back to the moon. They're going to reverse from quantitative tightening back to the quantitative easing. Hey, listen, we need this economy to be booming. And so I don't know. I guess they're going to go. They're already talking about maybe 3, 4, 5 interest rate cuts next year. Do you guys actually believe that inflation has tamed, has cooled itself to a point that they can get themselves back into some inflating up some bubbles? Where do you guys think that is going? That was I thought they were going to continue tightening a little bit. I thought that inflation had made its way to the mainstream where people were actually talking about it, where it might even be a contentious point in the elections of, hey, look at all the things that you've done, look at all the money that you've spent, and look at how common people can't afford things because you're robbing them through inflation. But we're reversing course. I guess they want a hot economy coming into the election season, and they don't care if we end up seeing more, I guess what they'll claim once again is just temporary inflation. We're back. Next is this dude. Israel they seem to have just outright lost the press war. It seems like everything down to the New York Times, to the Wall Street Journal, everyone's turning around and going, hey, listen, we were trying to have your back, but what's going on here is a little bit too aggressive, and I'm sorry, but we're going to have to report on it. And so you got Blinken over there saying he's working on Israel with their New Year's resolution to kill less civilians. He had these articles that they were just dropping these dumb bombs. They're pretending like they got leaflets, like they're targeting specific assets because they think they're worthwhile because of all the terrorists are there. And then you find out, I think they're just indiscriminately bombing. I thought the most damning thing that came out last week, we did talk about this on the Part of the Problem podcast, but it was in the New York Times where they were talking about that Israel has been sending cash to Hamas. And the reason that they were sending the cash to the Hamas people is, I guess the concept was that if the leadership was at least able to have enough cash on hand to run their daily affairs, pay off this guy, pay off that guy, keep a school open, show up, have meetings, and do all these things, well, then they would basically be able to bribe them into peace. Hey, listen, you guys can remain in charge. Your leadership can have your money. Everybody wins. To me, this is the most damning thing I've heard because the whole Israel storyline was we can't send any assets. We can't work with these people. They're a terrorist organization. And we hand them water. They're going to turn their tubes into missiles for us. And so while that's going on, you're actually working with the leadership and you're handing them the most fungible of all items. You're handing them cash. You're handing cash to the leadership while pretending like any resources you make available to the area will be instantly seized by that same leadership and not allowed to be used by the citizens. Seems pretty damning. Israeli hostages mistakenly killed by IDF were waving white flag. But the Israeli army, they went, oh, look, civilians. How many civilians? I mean, how bad is the Israeli army at not killing civilians if they managed to kill their own hostages who were waving white flags at them? Sounds to me like whatever your protocols and procedures are for trying not to kill civilians must be pretty bad if you manage to kill your own hostages who were there waving white flags at you. Rudy Giuliani ordered to pay $148 million to defamed election workers. How are election workers worth this much money? How is it possible that claiming that anything that went wrong in an election can get someone damages? How much profits are in, I guess, working at elections that saying that you did a bad job with the elections can get someone $148 million? I'd like to know. What is the Dominion contract worth that they were able to get $1 billion or whatever that judgment was from Fox News? What was it, $1.2 billion or something? Or in this case, $148 million? I got to get myself insurance and maybe start taking what I say a little bit more carefully because everyone's turning around going, I was defamed. We live in a world now where everyone cares about everyone's feelings so much that they go, oh my God, you were home sad because someone made statements about you. And then somehow, I guess you get your friends to call you up and make threats. You got to have some threats in there. You want a good payment, you're going to have to come up with some threats. Also, Rudy Giuliani said so much nonsense the entire time. Who was actually who was actually convinced by Rudy Giuliani's words that they were harassing these two people to the extent that they were actually awarded damages of $148 million?
Well, hi, Merry Christmas. So glad you could come.
Gee, it is a surprise, too. Wonderful. Merry Christmas, everybody. Guess who's with me today? It's my wife, Carol. She said I couldn't do that without her. So, but I thought I'd just tell our viewers and our supporters a little bit about our Christmas, because it's turning out real well this year because we have a bigger celebration and a bigger family. And as you might notice, we have a lot of people here, and this was a nice room that we have. We've been fortunate to have it because one of Carol's orders when she said, if we ever get a house, and not too many years ago, a long time after I got out of Congress and all, we built a house, and she said, I need a big room because I want to be able to seat everybody in the room at one time. Well, back then, I think the number was around 40, but now it could be, how many now might we have for Christmas?
Well, 51, I think.
51 and counting. You know why we're counting is,
yes.
Well, we have somebody coming, a new one?
We have a grandson that's going to be born, it's due like the day before Christmas. So we're hoping that we do get him here for Christmas.
Right. So and also we have one that a new member of the family that was 1 year old. So it'll be his first Christmas. Yes, that he's aware of. So it's been nice. But we do have a large family, and it's really a grand time because there was a time in the early years that a lot of people lived close by and they were in and out all the time. There still are a lot of people in and out because we have several generations involved. But they have to come from far distances. So who's coming from the furthest distance to make it to the Christmas?
Probably Rand from Washington.
Yeah, well, he also lives outside of Washington on half the time.
That's
and that'd be from Kentucky. Yeah. Kentucky. Yeah. So that's and then also we have another son physician that we don't see as often as the rest, but he comes rather frequently, and that's Robert. And he's coming from
Robert
where?
Had news when he said he was coming. He announced that we'll have another great grandbaby
That's
in
right.
July.
It's a really nice time as far as I'm concerned when we have the gathering together. Some of them, they're all athletically inclined, but they are very competitive. And most of the time, the competition, what I get a charge out of is people saying, well, how are you going to handle the discussion? People get together. Are they going to argue about religion and politics? And I keep thinking, that's the last thing that's ever been on my mind, even though they're my two favorite subjects. But in this house, at Christmas time, it'll be competitive. But it might be competitive in ping pong. It might be competitive, what they're going to play.
Rand wanted the new game.
The paddle ball?
Yeah, some kind of paddle ball.
No, he's very competitive. Rand's very competitive. And he'll be here, and he'll have a couple of his boys here. So,
and they're competitive,
right?
And the ones we have here are competitive.
But we really wanted to share our experience in our home with our supporters for the Liberty Report. That's been so important. And Carol is always anxious to meet more. We can't meet them all, but we have had some of our Liberty Report meetings here because it's convenient for us. So that has happened on quite a few occasions. And she's in charge then. So. It's always a good time, but I think of the Christmas time as being very, very good. And we've had, there's a lot of church going, Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, that most or all will be attending church at the time, trying to remember the real essence of what Christmas is all about, and that will be fine with all of us.
Well, our daughter, Joy, wanted us to stop by their house and visit their church, so we'll have a busy Christmas Eve, and all kids will come around to get the festivities started.
Right. So, well, this has been a wonderful opportunity for us because Carol once in a while gets behind on her Christmas cards. Last year there were some mechanical or family matters, and she was a little slow last year, so I had to lecture her. But she did much better this year. But I said, if we do a little hello and a happy and Merry Christmas to our supporters, and believe me, these are key supporters. These are the people that come visit almost every day when we have a program. And that's why it's real nice for us to reach out because, she's pretty good at sending out those cards and all, but she might miss one or two. And we may need some, an effort to make sure everybody knows that we're very interested because the people that support us become our very good friends. And we, once again, want to wish them a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Same too. Yes. So, and thanks for listening today. Come back soon.